evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's live stream. Just as I turn my camera on there, look behind us. It's not too long before the Christmas tree appears on the shelf there. It's absolutely freezing in Edinburgh. I'd imagine it is where you are too. But as ever, plenty to discuss tonight. All sorts of things going on in Scotland and in the UK in general. Let me get the comments on screen. There we are. So yeah, do fire in comments. Do share the live stream as well, wherever you're watching. That's good. Let more people join in. Now, where shall we start? All sorts of things to start off with this evening. What have I been up to? I've been editing a video today. Now, you may remember back in March, I did a lecture on Humza, Yousaf, Man, Myth, and Muslim. Now, this lecture was mentioned in our entry in Hope Not Hate's Guide to Hate 2024, because apparently they couldn't have seen this because it wasn't published yet. They reckon just the fact that I gave a lecture called Humza, Man, Myth, and Muslim was evidence that we deserved an entry in the Guide to Hate 2024, which is really ridiculous. But anyway, so I gave this lecture in Glasgow back in March, and the idea was to take it around Scotland. We're going to maybe do it in Edinburgh, Aberdeen, Inverness. I don't know, go around other cities as well with it. That was the plan. So for the first one, I just recorded it on my phone, stuck my phone on a tripod and recorded it. The plan was to record it properly. One of the later ones, get a proper camera and a microphone and do that. But then Humza spoiled the plan because he resigned shortly after the lecture. So it didn't go on tour. It didn't go to other parts of Scotland, unfortunately. But I am going to publish the recording of the first one. I think you'll find it interesting. So do have a watch of that. When it comes out, I say I'm sure you'll find it, very interesting indeed. What else have I been up to? So that's what I was just going to mention. I've mentioned this before. I'm going to mention it again. It's my complaint about X. Now, X, I think, is great in many ways. I mean, it's the one social media platform that doesn't discriminate against conservative values. So that's really good. But the thing I don't like about it, you probably find this as well if you use it, is it keeps switching you from following to for you without you asking for it. So today, when I went on to X, not even logging in, just click the icon on my phone, I find it switched me over to for you instead of following. And I don't notice at first because it's not quite subtle, the marking at the top. So you start scrolling through it. Eventually I thought thinking, this is a bit odd. Why is it full of American politics? Why is it full of people I don't really want to follow? There's all sorts of weird stuff here. What's going on here? And then I realized, hang on, X has switched me over from the people I want to follow to the people it wants to show to me. And I've got a problem with that. I don't like that because I think that's a big skew on debate where you've got people deciding what they want to watch and then X sort of overrules them routinely and says, no, we think this is the sort of thing you ought to get. And sometimes say it's things like Alex Jones. I have to say, when you go to For You as well, there seems to be an awful lot of Elon Musk as well. But my biggest point is it's like almost totally American. So it goes over to American politics. So their algorithm doesn't seem very geographical. So it's my one complaint with X is they shouldn't do that. They shouldn't decide for you that you don't actually want to see things from people you follow. You actually want to see whatever's trending in America or across the wider English-speaking world. So a little frustration there. Now, the assisted suicide, I'm not going to talk about this particularly, but just make one little observation. It really is the hot topic at the moment, isn't it? I mean, the media is full of it. Social media is full of it. And the reason I mention that is it's interesting to see that even in Scotland, where this law would not apply, there's far more attention on the issue of assisted suicide now than there ever has been over the last year or whatever, when there's been a bill progressing through the Scottish Parliament. Now, maybe if the bill in the Scottish Parliament got to its final stages, maybe there'd be a lot more attention given to it then. But I think it's just quite an interesting little experiment, I suppose, if you like, to see what influences political debate in Scotland. And UK media influence it very heavily indeed, even when it's something that doesn't apply in Scotland. That's been, it's like an experiment being conducted. So Scottish Family Party, we found ourselves talking about assisted suicide quite a bit in order to catch the trend or because it's in the news a lot, even though at the back of mind we're thinking, well, this doesn't apply in Scotland. But having said that, if it does pass in England and Wales, which in my opinion, I think it will, with a huge batch of new Labour MPs, I think it will, then that will make it much easier for it to pass in Scotland. Scotland will then seem behind, anomalous or whatever. So it's going to ease the way for assisted suicide in Scotland. But at the moment, the law being proposed only applies in England and Wales. And then the campaign against it seems very effective. There's a lot of figures, prominent figures, speaking out against it. I mean, like every day, it seems. So the campaign against it is very effective. But then the campaign for it is very effective as well. And it's probably got more friends in high places in the media, the BBC, other media as well. So that's very much a trend. In fact, I've got an image relating to this. Let me skip through and find it. This one here. Assisted dying is not an issue of party politics. The time for reform has come. And this was a joint letter, a joint article by a Labour MP, a Conservative MP, a Lib Dem MP, a Green Party MP, and a Reform Party MP. Now, the conference, you can watch the conference videos. They're up now. You can watch my speech. You can watch all the other speeches as well. Do catch up if you weren't there. One of the things I was saying in my speech in particular was we're different from Reform. Reform are not a socially conservative party. They're not driven by a consistent set of moral principles that are unchanging. They're driven more by, there's this new thing and we're a bit wound up by it. That's what drives them, basically. So here we've got Richard Tice. Is he the chairman? Is the deputy leader of Reform now? Deputy leader, isn't he? So he is supporting assisted suicide. So out of the Reform MPs, some will be for it, some will be against it. So a vote for Reform is a vote which says, I don't really care about assisted suicide. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. We're not really interested in that. We don't think it's important enough to have a policy on it. Whereas the Family Party, obviously, we say this is such a crucial issue that we do have a policy on it. So if assisted suicide passes, which in England and Wales say, I think it will. If it doesn't pass this time, I think it will at some point in the future, in a few years' time. But I mean, speaking pessimistically, when it passes, who will be arguing for it to be repealed? Will the Conservatives put in their manifesto, we're going to repeal this? Will the Reform Party put it in their manifesto, we're going to repeal this? No. Because that's the way the things go at the moment. Things take a step in the wrong direction. It's the ratchet effect. But then they never go back again. So the people who drag their heels at the time it's happening, which, well, it's not any of the parties, it might be some individual politicians, they'll drag their heels at the time it's happening. 10 years later, they'll probably be saying, yeah, that's fine. But 10 years later, they might be dragging their heels over extension to children or the mentally ill or involuntary or euthanasia or whatever. So they'll drag their heels about the next stage and the next stage and the next stage, but they'll never want to go back and restore the situation the way it should be, according to their principles. So that's what's different with the Family Party. We're not just dragging the heels over the latest thing to come along. We've got consistent principles. We oppose it as party policy, and we would fix it. If it does pass, we would repeal it at the earliest opportunity. I'd say that's a very important difference between the Family Party and other parties. Just one more thing to say about assisted. I don't want to use the word. Well, I've been using it lots in any case, so I'm probably doomed on the algorithm for social media. Anyway, assisted suicide. They call it assisted dying, which is an obvious deceptive euphemism. But assisted suicide. Another important point. Phil Holden actually mentioned to me, our deputy leader, last week. It was very interesting. If someone said to me, what's wrong with assisted suicide? Probably my first answer would be, you can't protect people against coercion or the perception of pressure or the perception that they have a duty to kill themselves. Now, even if the family are not thinking that in the slightest, people will worry that they are or think that they probably are. So people probably have a duty to kill themselves. And I think that's very unfortunate. And that will probably be the first argument I would come out with. Lots of others as well, the slippery slope, legitimizing suicide in general, etc., etc. But thinking about it, actually, they're secondary reasons. The primary reason I oppose assisted suicide is just I think it's wrong. I think taking human life like that, taking your own life, is just wrong. Suicide is wrong. Now, you could say at that point, oh, that's just your moral opinion. Politics shouldn't be just about getting people to go along with your moral opinion. It's about what's best for people. But my belief is that what's wrong, the reason it's wrong, is because it's going to be associated with negative consequences. Now, there's some things I might know they're wrong. How do I know? Well, is it reason, revelation, and intuition? Intuition being my conscience. My conscience tells me that suicide's wrong in this sort of situation. Definitely, suicide is wrong. So if suicide is wrong, then even if I didn't understand what the negative consequences were going to be, I would still be saying this is a bad thing. But what happens inevitably is when humanity, if like our society, goes down the wrong track, when it endorses something that's wrong, then negative consequences become apparent. So if someone said to me, why do you oppose assisted suicide? I think my primary answer ought to be, it's just wrong. It's wrong. And I know that. And therefore, because it's wrong, there are going to be negative consequences associated with it. Now, some of those negative consequences, maybe I can't foresee them at the moment. But they will occur because that's what happens. That's why things are wrong. They're associated with negative outcomes as well. So, yes, that was quite an interesting little insight. Right, John. Yeah, I just saw an advert for this today. March in Glasgow against assisted dying, Blythswood Square to St. Stephen's Church. That's organised by the Catholic Church, isn't it? But it's open to everybody. Everyone is welcome to go to that. Yep. So I'm very happy to give that a plug. Get along. I don't think I'm going to make it to that, but it's very good that's happening. I think that illustrates what I was saying as well. The law in Westminster only applies to England and Wales, yet it's really stirred things up in Scotland. And quite right, the people who oppose assisted suicide make the most of the opportunity of this national debate, UK-wide debate, to make our points. So that's very good. Yeah, no such thing as safeguard. Yeah, they talk about safeguards. I mean, it is total nonsense. I think I talked about this the other week. How can you have a safeguard to prevent someone worrying in their own mind about what their relatives might be thinking? I mean, you're going to put something in the law to stop that happening? I don't think so. Or a judge has to make the final decision. If you look at how judges have made the decisions whenever cases of should someone be allowed to die or not, well, virtually universally, judges make the decision, yes, the person should. The best thing for this person is that they die, rather than they be taken abroad for other healthcare, etc. So that is, yeah, very true. Raymond from Newton Abbey in Northern Ireland. Nice to hear from you. Right, let's see. I'll go back to the beginning of my slides now. Let's try and keep in order. I'll give this another mention. Just mention this very briefly. This is a meeting in Edinburgh, something new on Thursday next week, 28th of November, Christopher Community Church. And it's going to be a Christian meeting. So in some ways, it will be a bit like, a church service. There'll be singing some hymns, songs. There'll be a couple of people will speak. There'll be some prayers. But the idea of it is that the people who speak are going to focus on their experience in campaigning on moral issues, pro-life activism, assisted suicide, etc. So those sort of stories. And then someone's also going to give a message, a sort of Bible message. And again, that will be about being a prophetic voice in society, why we should be active in these areas. And the purpose of this meeting called Convocation is I've spoken to so many people who said that they feel in their church, they feel that maybe people don't necessarily understand them. They feel maybe a little bit of an alien. I know that they don't really hear about people doing the sort of things that they're doing. So the idea of this is it's say a gathering well, anyone's welcome, but it's particularly for Christians, and it is going to focus on those things in the context of Christian faith, open to all denominations. We're going to endeavor to be sort of non-denominational during that, so everyone's very welcome, and it'd be nice to see you. Right. Okay, let's have a look what's next. Next we have, this is classic, isn't it? Absolutely classic SNP's educational philosophy. It's fascinating, isn't it? Having a Labour government in London. It's as though like the SNP's been exported because they've basically got the same values. So what England and Wales are experiencing is basically what we've been experiencing, well, forever, really, with the Scottish Parliament. It's the same sort of philosophy behind it. So this is don't call bullies bullies, it'll upset them. Now, what's the philosophy behind this? The philosophy is the reason some children are bullies is because they've got low self-esteem and they haven't got the right support in place, and they're having a tough day, and things have happened in the background to them. Now, might some of those things be a factor? Maybe some of those things might be a factor. I think the self-esteem one is just plain wrong. Research has been conducted in this area and shown that bullies actually have higher self-esteem. They're really cocksure. They think they're amazing, and that's what gives them the right to push other people around. So bullies have excess self-esteem, actually. But the idea of this is if you call someone a bully, that will damage their self-esteem. It'll upset them, and that will just make them even worse, which is, as far as I'm concerned, totally counterintuitive and just totally wrong. So instead of seeing kids as, like, in a realistic view, that some kids are a bit unpleasant, some kids take pleasure in causing pain and misery for other kids. I mean, let's face it, some adults do that as well. Maybe we all experience the temptation to that, but that's just part of human nature. And when kids do that, they need to learn that that's not going to be accepted, not going to be tolerated. In fact, it's going to be punished, because the people in power, the people with the authority, the teachers, the school, they're going to use that authority to defend children who have been bullied. So they'll use the authority to deal with the bully, to punish the bully in order to protect the innocent victims. And therefore, the children in that school community learn that that's the proper function of authority, is to protect the vulnerable from the strong. Now, put it like that, you think people on the left of politics, you think they think, oh, absolutely, that's what we're all about, protecting the vulnerable from the strong and the bad. That's absolutely what we're about. But no, that's not what they're about. What they're about is basically taking away personal responsibility. They don't want to communicate to anyone what you're doing is wrong, or maybe even in this regard, your character is not good. You need to change. You need to take responsibility, and you need to change. They don't like that message. They're like, this, not really your fault. It's society's fault. It's someone else's fault, and we're just going to help you. And helping you, you're going to think we're really great, and therefore we're going to build up a really positive relationship, and that's going to make all the difference. So very unrealistic approach. Now, I say some of those factors, do they lead to bad behavior? I mean, they can do. They can do. But even if the bad behavior is partly the result of various factors in a young person's life, then still, they've still got to learn. Okay, you're not helping someone. You say, oh, yeah, we understand why you're a bully and why you go around thumping people. It's because this happened in early life. It's because you've got this issue and various problems. But okay, fair enough. But if that person doesn't stop thumping people, what's going to happen in later life? They're going to be unemployable. They're going to find themselves in prison. They're going to have no friends or whatever. They're going to have no stable relationships. So this sort of character development is really, really important. But as far as the SNP is concerned, they think if you can change someone's self-perception, so long as you build up their self-esteem and make them think they're a great person, then, well, they'll follow through and behave like that. So totally backwards. I mean, it makes you wonder, what does it take in Scottish education? There is a slew of reports in the media. I mean, it's weekly. There'll be the latest report about bad behavior in schools, teachers complaining about it, unions, surveys being done, a huge amount. I mean, what doesn't get reported so much is children complaining about it, because they don't really have a voice in the media on this issue. It'd actually be good if they did, actually. So there's a huge problem, but the Scottish government cannot deviate from its philosophy. It cannot deviate from the path that it's on. And it's got to be this sort of restorative, no punishment, building self-esteem, it's all about relationships type approach. And they keep the worse the problem gets, the worse the more the SNP pushes its ideology, that makes the problem even worse. So that's the situation we've got there. Right, let's have a look what we've got next. Now, this is another educational issue. This was from the Times, I think. Sex education program blamed for rise in number of trans children. This is about Scotland, and it's about the RSHP education program. It says introduced in 2014. That was that the curriculum was introduced. Then the resources were introduced around 2019, roughly around then. Then we had LGBT inclusive education policy introduced about 2017. Then we've had the transgender guidance for schools introduced about 2021, I would say. So all these government policies have contributed to a situation where children in school are taught that basically you can change gender. If you feel you're the other gender, then you can change. That's normal, natural, and healthy. And now, needless to say, I mean, I don't need to see research about that. It's just obvious, isn't it? If that's what you teach children all the way from nursery, all the way through school, then a significant number of them, unfortunately, are going to believe it. They're going to hear the teacher saying that, and they'll say, oh, that must be true. Maybe I'll give this a try. And children do that, and the consequences are negative, in some cases catastrophic. So a huge amount of damage to children done by the Scottish government's policy. Now, the parties in the Scottish Parliament, how do they rate on this? When LGBT inclusive education was introduced, it was, in inverted commas, debated in the Parliament. Not a single MSP, let alone a party, said this policy of putting LGBT education in every subject at every age throughout the curriculum, this policy is wrong. None of them said that. None of them challenged it, because at that time, we were in the time of, well, I think it was, you know, that the LGBT movement was pretty dominant. There's been a bit of pushback since on the trans thing, just on the T issue. There's been some pushback. This was the stage when the pushback hadn't really got going, I would say. And so I'm sure if there was the same debate now, you might get a few conservative MSPs standing up and saying, yeah, we're not really happy with this, or that classic line, or we think there's other priorities at the moment. They don't actually get to the heart of the fact that this is corrupting and damaging children. There's other priorities at the moment. So it's a bit like I was saying earlier. If there'd been someone from the family party in the Parliament at that point, they would have stood up and said, this is totally wrong, and here are 10 reasons why it's wrong and the damage that it will do. Because the Scottish Family Party, we don't go with fashion. We don't say, oh, well, this seems to be the way things are heading, so let's just keep a head down for the time being. And, oh, it seems like it's okay to talk about this now. We'll maybe say a thing or two. We've got consistent principles, and we apply them every time on every issue. So when LGBT inclusive education came along, we would have been opposing it. So everyone, tell everyone, vote for the Scottish Family Party and put someone in the Parliament who will nip these things in the bud, but who will oppose it at the earliest possible opportunity. I'm saying the harm being done, I haven't even looked in detail at the research because it's just obvious. It's obvious that this is going to happen. This is a story from a group in Glasgow who are monitoring the ill effects of the RSHP program in schools in Glasgow, particularly the transgender thing as well. And they're saying psychological damage caused. Of course it is, inevitably. And right, this is a classic example of the Conservatives in action. This is a letter from a Conservative MSP to the Education Authority saying she's concerned about, you know, trans ideology in schools, LGBT youth Scotland having a lot of influence. I think that's just a classic illustration of the Conservative Party. Here we are, 2024. They've just about managed to say it. Just about. But unfortunately, they are like 7 years too late. Because these things came in basically 7 years ago. This came in. Where were the Conservatives? Not there. Nothing to say. Wasn't quite in fashion. Didn't quite fit their strategy at the time. So they said nothing. It makes it, I mean, what do they believe? Do they really believe there's a problem here, or they've just been opportunists? Who knows? Who knows? But it's a classic case of the Conservatives in action. As soon as there's a bit of a head of steam about something, they'll jump on the bandwagon and say, oh, yeah, us too. We think that too. But do you? 7 years ago, when this was being proposed, where were you? Nowhere. Nowhere to be seen. And I think that is unforgivable of a political party. So don't vote for them. Right. What else? Right. This is interesting. Mike, unions have got a nerve. They've been instrumental in undermining educational standards and undermining authority figures. Yes, that's a very good point. Actually, the unions are basically another arm of the government in terms of ideology. They're different from the government, and they want teachers paying more money for less work. I don't mean that to sound flippant, but that is what unions basically try and do, don't they? They're trying to get more pay for less work for their people they represent. but also the unions have pushed this sort of left progressive education philosophy for decades. This resulted in deterioration of authority, which results in teachers facing appalling behavior in school. And then the teachers report this appalling behavior to exactly the same unions, who produce reports on it and documents and statements and this, that, and the other about how bad it is and what needs doing about it. But it is partly, as you say, very significantly of their making. Now, people of the union's perspective, what do they think the solution is? Do they think the solution is, we've got to toughen up here and restore authority and discipline? Oh, no, no, no. The solution is things like, we need more classroom assistants. So every naughty boy needs a full-time member of staff following him around all day. It's like G.K. Chesterton talked about the infinite supply of paid employees, paid government employees that some people seem to think exists. That's the thing they propose. Or they just criticize senior management, and they say that the teachers feel they're not supported by school leadership. Okay, all very well, but what do you want school leadership to do? Do you want them to really toughen up and get? Well, no, actually, because your philosophy is completely against that. But when teachers are saying to you, we're unsupported, translation, we report these things to senior management and nothing happens. Basically, the kids are just back again and nothing's happened. Then the union takes that on board, but then they haven't got any solution for what the school should actually done. So, yeah, very good point. Interesting point. I'm not sure I've thought that thought before. Right, moving swiftly on. We put this on social media this week. That's actually from our environment policy. What have we been doing recently on social media is just put in a paragraph from our policies. Some of the things that maybe we don't talk about particularly often. So here's this one. The natural beauty of Scotland, its flora and fauna, should be conserved, respecting the importance of providing a healthy outdoor environment for our children, families and citizens, as well as tourists to enjoy. And note the order there. So primarily for residents, but also for tourism as well. It's very important. Our beaches, rivers, hills, forests, fields and glens should be clean, and natural biodiversity considered a valuable portion of the nation's inherent wealth. I don't know, that's particularly controversial, is it? But I think maybe with the environmental movement at the moment, the environmental movement is highly political. And you maybe don't hear so much about conserving beauty. You hear more about, throwing paint over paintings in art galleries, this sort of thing. So yeah, that was just a bit from our policies. Talked about that one. Oh, this was funny. The national newspaper. I don't know how long the national newspaper can limp along for. Surely it must be. I mean, can it possibly be viable as a business? It's part of the Herald, isn't it? It's a branch of the Herald newspaper. So maybe their costs are quite low, but surely its days are numbered, I would imagine. But they ran this article that was it's quite amusing. So you can see the picture there with myself. That's Gillian Wright, who I don't know if she works for them. Yeah, I think she probably does. But anyway, but she campaigns with Care Not Killing against assisted suicide. And that is Bishop John Keenan, Catholic Bishop of Paisley, there as well. And that photograph was taken at the SPUC, Society for the Protection of Women and Children event in Dundee. And the three of us were the three speakers at the event. And someone obviously took a photograph afterwards. I think I put it on our social media. So that was that. So someone's found this photograph, and the headline, "Fears over assisted dying commentators," that would be Gillian Wright, I think, "links to religious right." Links to religious right. Now, who's the religious right? I assume Bishop Keenan isn't the religious right. I assume that must be me. But what are they on about? What's the story? So the stories come from the humanists. Now, I remember how many years ago you have to go back. We went back 10 years. The humanists and the secularists, they were really active, and they used to get a lot of media exposure. And basically, anyone with a religious faith who made some point that aligned with their religious views, they tried to suggest that somehow there's something wrong with that. That we can't possibly take that seriously because it was said by a religious person. So that's the basic idea. Because Care Not Killing is a secular organization. Now, I keep having to explain what secular means. By a secular organization, that doesn't mean there are no Christians in it. It doesn't mean that their beliefs of the people are not motivated by any religious faith. It doesn't mean that. It means that what they do, how they operate, is they put forward secular arguments. They don't put forward religious arguments. They put forward practical and moral arguments. Now, you could say there's actually no moral arguments without a God to found objective morality in, but that's a whole other question. So Care Not Killing is a secular organization. To be honest, are all the people involved in it Christians? I think they probably are. Yeah, probably are. Yeah, but so what? The humanists think, we've found them out. We've exposed what they're really about because they're Christians. So we don't need to listen to them because they're Christians. Whereas humanists, Humanist Society of Scotland, their mission is basically to oppose anything that Christians seem to want. So any controversy that comes along, if there's not Christians on one side of it, then they're not interested in it. That's a non-issue. But where it's something where a Christian teaching is in contrast with the general drift of society, then the humanists want to be on the other side to the Christians. Anyway, so I put the alternative headline under there: sinister network of people who value life exposed by the National. And whoever reads this stuff for the National and thinks, oh yeah, that's a good point, glad the Nationals exposed this scandal there. I mean, utterly ridiculous. Anyway, we've had quite a few ridiculous articles in the National. The other one, they're partners in crime, the Daily Record. I mean, the Daily Record print the most ridiculous hit pieces from time to time as well. So the National, how long will it last? Who knows? I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't last too long. Right, a big 16. Right, we talked about this on social media this week. A little reminder of our policy here. This is about the age of consent. Now, you probably think the age of consent in the UK and in Scotland is 16. And technically it is, but in practice, it isn't. Because in Scotland, the guidance, the police policy, the prosecution policy is that under 16s who have sex basically do not get prosecuted so long as the person they're having sex with, the age gap isn't more than 3 years. So, a 13-year-old having sex with a 16-year-old, that could well be absolutely fine. And the police wouldn't be interested, social work wouldn't be interested, no one would be interested, apart from maybe the parents and people like that. But in terms of state agents, they're basically not going to be interested in that. So effectively in Scotland, the age of consent has been changed from 16 to 13, but they did it in an underhand way, so you don't have to have the big controversy of a debate about it. They just did it by, it's not like they've done with drugs. So you say, this is illegal, but if you do it, don't worry, nothing's going to happen. And children are taught in school that don't worry, nothing's going to happen. It's illegal, but don't worry, nothing will happen. In fact, you've got a right to have illegal underage sex. So that's one of our, again, I think unique policies. I'm not aware of any other party having that policy, but I think it could solve a lot of problems. The grooming gang issues, I think some of those girls who went for help, then if a girl's, say, 14, and I believe that the social work, the police should swing into action and say, all right, something's gone wrong here. Whereas what actually happens is, did you consent? Were you consent? Or a 13-year-old even, did you consent? That's what we need to establish. And I think that is wrong. Okay. Right. Now, I think, we were talking last week when Paul Atkin was on last week. We talked a lot about the Scottish Government's abortion policy and provision review. And Engender's the Scottish taxpayer-funded feminist organisation. They really are going all out, campaigning for the full decriminalisation of abortion, removal of all time limits, and they're using your taxes. They get paid money from your taxes in order to campaign for this. This was just one of the things they were putting forward as an argument. They said we urgently need to repeal the Concealment of Birth Act. Now, the Concealment of Birth Act is basically saying it's illegal to conceal pregnancy and to conceal the fact that you've given birth, and then etc. I don't want to go into the whole details of the law because I don't need to, because it doesn't apply in Scotland. This law doesn't apply in Scotland. Yet Engender seems to be arguing that we really need to decriminalize abortion in order to reform all the laws, including getting rid of the Concealment of Birth Act. Which is totally nonsense. Doesn't even apply here. Now, the situation with abortion law in Scotland, I think I explained this before, just explain it again, is that the government, basically, they're heading towards decriminalization. They want to decriminalize abortion, take away all the time limits. But the tricky issue they've got is it's not clear that abortion is illegal at any stage in any case in Scotland. There's a law that says when you can have an abortion, but there's not a law, it seems, that says you can't have one in other circumstances. So it's as though they want to decriminalize because that's what they think you ought to do to be on the right side of history, but they can't quite find any laws to repeal about it. So they're in a bit of a tricky situation. So watch this space. Let's see. Let's see. I find this was interesting. The Greens, Scottish Green Party, they're raising money so they can take a stand against Donald Trump. Now, what on earth are the Scottish Greens going to do about Donald Trump? Now, they would say, oh, we've got plans. Basically, their plan is to do things like undermine his businesses in Scotland by whatever regulatory means they can find. So they'll find ways to attack Donald Trump's businesses in Scotland, which would be a pretty trivial thing to do in any case. But what they're basically doing, they're trying to cash in on anti-Trump feeling. And I think it's ethically dubious, let's put it that way, for a political party to try and cash in on the unpopularity among their supporters of Donald Trump. I think that's wrong to do that. It's disingenuous to try and to be claiming somehow or other the Scottish Greens can take money off people and use that to fight against Donald Trump. I'm not buying that. I think that for a lot of people, their political spectrum, if you like, their political moral spectrum goes from Trump at one end, and who would be at the other end? Who would be a good person on the other end? I don't know, maybe Kamala Harris or whatever. You know, that's Trump and Brexit at one end, Kamala Harris, BBC, whatever at the other end, and that's the spectrum. That's so bad is Trump and Brexit, good is Kamala Harris and the BBC. That's the sort of spectrum. But I just can't get my head around that. I just want to judge. Right, I've got a system of moral standards to judge things by, rather than having this sort of superficial, populist sort of view of it. But anyway, so the Scottish Greens, not impressed, not good at all. Now, here's an interesting topic. Rumours circulating wildly on the internet, some of which, I think I've got a headline here, have I? No. Some of which have been debunked in the media. So this is I'm going to try and pronounce his name, the Southport murderer alleged, even though it's absolutely obviously did it, anyway alleged. So we'll be facing trial in January. So what rumours have there? Rumours have been circulating online that Keir Starmer was the lawyer who enabled the murderer's alleged father to stay in Britain because he had some sort of asylum claim. And yeah, so the rumor was his lawyer was Keir Starmer. In other words, if it hadn't been for Keir Starmer, this family wouldn't have been in Britain. So you can see why people would want to circulate that. You can see why people would be interested in that rumor. Quite incendiary and damaging to Keir Starmer. Having said that, even if it were true, would it be fair to blame Keir Starmer for that? I would suggest possibly not, because he's doing his job as a lawyer. It's the law that's at fault, or it's the judge that's at fault if the wrong decision was made. All Keir Starmer was doing his job. I suspect Keir Starmer might have been trying especially hard, or decided to focus on these sort of issues. Maybe he was giving his time free or reduced fees or something. So possibly there could be some responsibility, but not much of it. So even if it were true, I think it would be a bit unfair to try and land that on Keir Starmer. But I think it's just not true. It's not true. The government spokesman has said it's just not true. And on the internet, you see people that put various documents up in evidence, these sort of official-looking court papers. We look at them, and it's just not evidence for what they're claiming. It hasn't got, it might have Keir Starmer's name on, but it hasn't got the the man's name on it. So then that just is not true. Now, okay, I may be proved wrong. Maybe there is evidence out there. Maybe there's some cover-up going on. But what I'm seeing at the moment, that is just not true. And I think this is an example where things can absolutely take off on the internet obviously no evidence, it seems, in this case. Now, the ideal situation is this sort of accusation, then yes, it gets allegations, wrong word, story, if you like, it gets circulated. Then Keir Starmer refutes it, denies it, then that's good. And then what would be ideal if a small number of people really made an effort to try and check to see if it was true? That would be helpful. What's not helpful is for this to be circulated around hundreds of thousands of people, half of whom end up thinking, oh, there's probably something in it, and they start believing it. So that is interesting what's going on there. I mean, some of the people have suggested these pictures where he's always pulling his T-shirt up. This is concealing a large beard below, but not sure about that at all. I mean, the other thing that's rumored as well is that the young man's father was involved in the Rwandan genocide. Now, again, you can see why that would be quite an explosive story. Because if that's true, it would raise the question, if he was involved on the perpetrator's side, what on earth did we let him in for? But again, I haven't seen any solid evidence of that at all. So that the rumor mill might be a long way ahead of reality, but I'm open-minded. I'm open-minded. Say that the people who will really put an effort in to try and find out the truth, all strength to them. People that are just sharing it all over the place, and people who are believing it without the evidence, are not so good. So let's see. Sean, I agree. Blaming Starmer for doing his job as a lawyer representing the father's asylum claim would be unfair. It would. Now, I think some of the things that are blamed on Keir Starmer when he was, I should get this right, what was it? Director of Public Prosecutions. I forget the name. Anyway, the person who decides which cases go to court or not, some of his decisions there, he very definitely bears responsibility for. I think I said last week, didn't I? Like in cases where someone assists someone to commit suicide, then Keir Starmer said, no, we're not interested in that. Sex-selective abortion cases, no, he wasn't interested in that. Now, obviously, there were the accusations about Jimmy Savile. I don't know. I haven't looked into those. So I think he is accountable for those. But for acting as a lawyer, I suspect is not accountable. So let's see what's happening there. The conference video I mentioned already. Video from our conference is now available on the YouTube channel. So do catch up with that. And just while that, do share the live stream. Hit share or repost or whatever you do on the social media platform you're on. And I'll just go back to the beginning now. We're about halfway through. There are more people watching. I will just mention this event Thursday next week in Edinburgh. It's a gathering for Christians of all denominations, Christians who are involved in pro-life activism, politics, campaigning on social issues, etc. People involved in that sort of thing. And the idea is we'll sing some hymns, songs. There'll be a couple of talks, some prayers. And the idea is it will be a context where you hear from other Christians who are doing the sort of things that you're doing, sharing their experiences. And it's designed to be somewhere where people involved in this sort of thing feel they're with like-minded people, because maybe that's not always the case in all churches. That's what I'm hearing from a lot of people. In any case, so you'll be very welcome. I say if you're not Christian, you'll be very welcome. Anyone will be welcome to come along. It's an experiment. We'll see how it goes and take it from there. Right, where are we? We've done that. Right, this is an example of the pro-life group CBR in action. And what they do is they go onto the street. Well, it's one of the things they do, and take abortion images that in some cases are quite shocking. And this are in busy places. Then they'll give out leaflets. And their philosophy is they want to show people the reality of abortion, because in many cases, that's the one thing that changes people's minds. And I think that's true. I think a lot of people, rational arguments, they haven't really got time for that. And, they're just walking on the street. And if they did have time, maybe it's quite difficult to get through because they've got other views very well embedded in their mind. But sometimes an image can just cut through all of that and really make a difference to someone's opinion. So they've been operating in England for a long time. They now operate in Scotland as well. I've always been surprised in Scotland how little controversy there was about it. I thought that would be like a day one news story. The moment they went and did that, I thought the press would be there and there would be an opportunity for a bad news story about pro-life people. Look at what these terrible people are doing now. With CBR, I think we'll probably think, well, that's good because it's keeping abortion in the media. We want the issue talked about and we want the reality to be there. But there are just, I wouldn't say too much, but I think there's just the early stages in Scotland that there may be some sort of reaction coming with this. So we'll follow this in the weeks to come and see how things develop. I think this might develop into quite a significant story in Scotland. Let's see. Humza Yousaf. Has Humza Yousaf admitted he's a racist? Right, that's slightly tongue-in-cheek, but only slightly. Do you follow this story? So basically, Elon Musk called Humza Yousaf a racist because of his white speech. And then Elon Musk also said, they're saying, if this went to court, then Elon Musk said, if we recover documents, if we see your private communications, that will really prove that you're a racist. Then Humza Yousaf said, you must have been looking at my secret text messages. Think, hang on a minute. Hang on, what does that imply? So by analogy, imagine this situation. Let's just say you've got a pal called Alan and he's married to, I don't know, Teresa, say. And you said to Alan one day, I've got evidence that you're having an affair with Samantha. And Alan said, you must have been checking my text messages. Well, what do you think? Well, Alan's is as good as admitted, isn't it? Alan's effectively implying these text messages must be full of romantic communications with Samantha. Is it not the same with Humza Yousaf? So Elon Musk says, basically, your private messages show that you're racist. And Humza Yousaf says, you must have been checking my ex messages. It's like an admission. It's like an admission. And now Humza Yousaf reckons that's not the case. He reckons his messages are all squeaky clean. But yeah, anyway, it wasn't the wisest thing to say by Humza Yousaf. Now, if I was still giving my lecture about Humza Yousaf, man, myth, and Muslim, I would maybe add this in. In fact, I could have added a few more things. But just to say, yeah, the video, Humza, man, myth, and Muslim, my lecture about him from just before he resigned, will be published on YouTube. I'm just putting the slides into it at the moment. I'm sure you'll find it interesting. I'm sure, even though he's not so prominent anymore, I'm sure you'll find it interesting. So I strongly recommend do watch that video when it goes up on YouTube. So, yep, okay. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I've heard people say that actual fetus images are as shocking and controversial to people often as abortion images. Yeah, I think that's interesting. That's interesting. So maybe that's the way they'll end up going. We shall see. We shall see. Right, it's BBC time. Now, this is from a BBC article from, I think it was sometime last week. And the BBC very much like to promote childlessness by choice. They like to have positive articles about, Bob and Alice decided not to have children, and let's talk about their great life they have together and all the exciting holidays they go on, and they can tell us all about their decision, and we're absolutely fine. Because basically the BBC likes to push a childlessness agenda, basically like the idea of, we're now going to have a report from the Harris family. They've got 8 children. Their house is a hive of activity. Everyone's having fun. So how does it feel? How are you enjoying life in this big family? No way. You won't get that on the BBC. What you'll get is stories of couples choosing not to have children and stories like this as well. Now, this was an article they did trying to explain why people choose not to have children. But obviously, it's going to have the BBC sort of slant with it. So first of all, we have Ellie, age 39, who says, I've frozen my eggs. So let's find a bit more about Ellie. Lives in Sheffield, wants to have children, but she hasn't found a suitable partner. Right, I would say, well, that means, well, unfortunately, you can't have children. You need to find a suitable partner. I'm sure there's There'll be partners out there. Maybe try different ways to try and find them. I don't know. But yeah, I would say if you unfortunately can't find a partner, then unfortunately you're not going to have the children. So 2 years ago, she spent £18,000 on 2 cycles of egg freezing. £18,000. She said, I find it really frustrating. It's a lot of cost for something that may not ever lead to anything. So £18,000, that must be pretty desperate with that. She hopes to use them if she meets someone or if she reaches a financial situation where she can go it alone with the aid of a sperm donor. Right, okay, all this completely wrong. So in other words, cut out the need for a dad and create a fatherless child, basically, which is not fair on the child. That child didn't consent to coming into the world with no father figure. So that is just wrong. A report from the Child Poverty Action Group last year found the average cost of raising a child to age 18 was £166,000 for a couple, £220,000 for a lone parent. I don't believe those figures. For a start, lone parents, I think, are usually less wealthy, significantly less wealthy. So how they spend significantly more raising their children, I just don't believe it. That's just not true. What they're trying to make the point of look at all the extra childcare costs a single parent has, a lone parent has. That's what they're trying to make, but I just don't believe the figures. Though Ellie thought she would meet someone in her late 20s, despite proactively being on all the apps. It just didn't happen. Being on all the apps. Really? Really? Not a good plan. Being on all the apps. Meet people. Go meet people. Preferably not when they're half drunk as well. Just do things to meet people. That's another piece of advice I would give to Ellie. She says, dating has become fruitless, citing a seemingly endless choice that dating apps offer as a factor of fewer people wanting to commit. Right, okay, fair enough. That's men's fault. That's men's fault because there's a culture among men that marriage is risky. I mean, basically for men, why bother? More or less, roughly speaking, in a certain way, men are basically not so keen on the commitment, are more keen on the sex. And women in general, as a culture, have made the very bad decision of saying to men, okay, that's fine. You can have the sex without the commitment. So the men then think, okay, that's great. We won't bother with the commitment then. So men are not behaving. Men are not showing the values and the attitudes that women would like them to. Whose fault is it? Well, it's the men's fault. It's their values. But a big part of what's produced that is a change in the overall culture of behavior among women as well. So it's all going wrong. And I say Ellie, in a sense, is a victim of that as well. The men, in a sense, are a victim because they haven't been taught the value of commitment and fatherhood and family life. They just don't see that. They're just seeing it as, go to the dating app to find someone to have sex with. Going it alone would be a big decision, says Ellie. Big decision for you, but you're not the most important in this, Ellie. It'd be an even bigger decision for the child you choose to bring into the world without a dad. But you don't even seem to be considering that. But she's saying if she has enough money to do that. So she said it would cost her a further £10,000 to use a sperm donor with IVF. Right, so what a world we live in. But the BBC is putting this forward as, this is just a typical story. So it's not saying, hey, everyone, why don't you just try this as well? But it's presenting it as, this is just normal, natural and healthy. Right, our next person, Dami Olonisakim, a sex and relationships podcaster. Right, that's probably not a good start, is it? But anyway, lives in London. Improvements in fertility treatments, such as egg freezing, are empowering and give women more control than ever. They give women more control. They give children less control. They take away, they make decisions on behalf of children to, for example, not have a dad. Motherhood, she says, is not something to be taken lightly. No, nor is fatherhood either. But that doesn't seem to enter Dami's head in the slightest. Childcare costs are soaring. Maternity policies are limited. Women basically have to think really hard, she says. Right, classic BBC. As far as the BBC is concerned, why don't women have more children? Well, it's because the state doesn't offer enough childcare. And that's what all the parties in the Scottish Parliament think. It's just universal. The assumption is that families have children or women have children, then their number one mission is to farm them out for someone else to look after them so they can get on with doing something more important. like working in an office or doing a course in gender studies or whatever. So yeah, that's very much the BBC line. There needs to be more money to enable parents, or mums in particular, to not be with their own young children. But then you create a culture where the assumption is that young children are a hassle. There's something you want to get rid of. There's something that inhibits you from doing what you really want you to do, the really important things. She also wants to have the support system of a long-term partner in place before having children. The support system. Yeah, it's almost as if we could do with some system in society, some sort of institution, some cultural institution that means that a woman and a man commit to each other, so they're providing a system of mutual support before the possibility of having children. We can almost do with something like that, couldn't we? Maybe someone will think of it sometime, and then that would be great. We'll keep working on that one for you. Right, next one. HGV driver Chris Taylor and dog groomer Jenna Rathmel jointly earn an income of $60,000 and have been together for 11 years. The couple who live in Wakefield in West Yorkshire considered having children. We have had deep conversations where we go through the options and discuss things like school, cost and routine. But the conclusion was that the cost was too high. I would say to that, if I were in challenger mode, I would say it's not the cost is too high, just that your priorities are all wrong. With a joint income of 60,000, I mean, maybe this couple's not that, but a lot of couples with that sort of income, maybe they choose a house that really puts them pretty flat out with the mortgage. They're really stretched to pay the mortgage. Then maybe they've got a car or a car reach. They've got monthly payments on those. They're expensive holidays. So maybe they've got a lifestyle that's basically fits their income. And then they look at the possibility of adding children in. I think, well, it doesn't work. There's not room for them. So again, it's the priorities in that. Now, the cost of housing is important. The family party wants family type homes to be cheaper. That's a really important thing because it does discourage people from having children. And yes, it's not financial incentives, but like higher child benefit payments, transferable tax allowance. We've got lots of policies that would help this couple. If they choose to have children, it would help them financially. And maybe that would help. Maybe that would make the difference. But alongside that, we also need the culture change for people to see and prioritize procreation by hearing about what a wonderful thing it is. And the BBC articles about that, where are they? Well, usually nowhere to be seen. Oh, we've got another one as well. Right, Carrie 34. I like the idea of adopting. When I first read that, I thought, fantastic. Adopting is a fantastic, a magnificent thing to do, where you take children in need and provide them with what they most need. A mother and a father, a stable home, a loving home for them to be brought up with. So it's taking what was a difficult situation with the children and giving them the best possible option. It's brilliant, a fantastic thing to do. So I read that. That sounds brilliant. Let's read a bit more about it, shall we? Carrie says, Carrie's the bloke. Okay, Carrie says his views are shared by Caitlin. They're both concerned about the effects of the climate crisis. I'm quite happy with the idea of adopting. That way I'm helping someone else struggling in the system. Right, and that's unfortunate, isn't it? I mean, as it happens, there are adoptive parents, potential adoptive parents, queuing up, metaphorically, for newborn children. So unwanted newborns, there are adoptive parents ready and waiting for them in general. So that is a good thing. So in wanting to adopt, they're probably not so much going to be helping the children there, because at birth there are plenty of adoptive parents. But their point is they think it's wrong to have their own children because of the climate crisis. As I put it in my speech at the conference last year, they don't want to cause the patch of tiny carbon footprints. Now, just on the subject of the climate crisis, I'm not sure crisis is quite the right word. I think the solution to global warming, whatever you think about it, the solution to climate change in the medium to longer term is going to be declining population. Fertility rates are plummeting, have plummeted, are projected to continue plummeting. So the population, particularly in advanced nations, is going to be far less than it is now. Therefore, their carbon emissions are going to be far, far lower. So I see in the longer term, the most effective the projection for climate change is the carbon emissions will plummet because of plummeting population. But I've never heard any environmentalists say, well, actually, that's good news. Actually, this means things are going to look after themselves to some degree. They'll never say that. But to choose not to have your own children because of the climate crisis, that's really sad. I think that's really sad. It's human nature to want to reproduce, to want to have children, a really crucial part of life for the majority of people. I know not for all people, for various reasons, but for a lot of people, a really important thing. But what the BBC does is it chips away at that. It chips away at the assumption that, that for the vast majority of people, the best path through life is to find someone, fall in love, get married, have children, bring up a family, and that's a very positive route through life, and is the best option for many, many people. But say the BBC want to chip away at that, and stories of couples choosing childlessness, particularly for environmental reasons, just come through the BBC, drip, drip, drip. You get one after another coming through, and it's very, very harmful, very sad as well. I think it's potentially depriving people of what will be a great joy. So, right, Kathy, big push is now people not to have children. Yes, also people saying, I don't want children. So every excuse under the sun. Very selfish people, so sad they don't want children, don't know what they're missing out on. Indeed. I mean, I don't know if this is a parallel. I don't know if this is related, but it might be. I mean, just the world seems full of dogs at the moment. I think I heard something that the dog population is actually rocketing, but that's certainly my impression. You go out for a walk, there are more and more and more dogs around, and I wonder, how many couples, individuals, whatever, are focusing on pets rather than children. Right, we're almost finished now. Just the floods in Spain. Some of the videos from there are really quite shocking to see, like cars piled up 3 or 4 high. But this is from Bjorn Lomborg. It's well worth following on climate things. It doesn't say that climate change doesn't exist, or there's not a problem, or it's not caused, at least in part, by human activity. But he just gives a bit of perspective to things. So this is a graph showing the number of people who died in European floods. And you can see the trend, basically absolutely plummeting. And he says, for example, in America, where the damage done by hurricanes, the financial damage, sometimes seems to be going up, for example. And that's often because people just are more willing to build in places where hurricanes are common or where flooding is common. So it's always good to get another perspective on those things. I thought you might have been interested in just seeing that graph. It's worth a look. Now, we're over this. I'll make this the last thing. One last thing. Migrant crisis. So illegal immigration. It irritates me a bit when these people are called asylum seekers, when maybe occasionally there might be a genuine asylum seeker, but they're people who know full well that they're breaking the law, they're entering Britain illegally, and that they shouldn't be coming here to claim asylum. They should do that in France or whatever first safe country they got to. So I think these people basically are criminals. But the Labour Party will not admit that, because in Labour land, the individual is always the victim. The organisation, the powerful thing, the big thing, they're the bad ones. The individual is the victim, because the sort of neo-Marxist view, basically the strong are bad, the weak are good. So when it comes to illegal immigration, who are the strong? Well, sort of the government, I suppose, who could try and stop it. And the other strong is the criminal gangs who arrange this and arrange the illegal trips across the channel. So they're the strong. So the Labour government will go after them and really say, we're going to smash these gangs of criminals. I mean, quite rightly, absolutely. I mean, they do need to be got, basically, need to be punished, need to be sorted out, need to be stopped, absolutely. But they will not accept that the individuals involved as well are also criminals. They're also making a choice to deliberately break the law and know they're doing something that they ought not to do. But Labour will do anything apart from acknowledging that. And it's just an interesting insight into their political philosophy. I say we're used to it in Scotland, But England and Wales, well, not Wales. Wales have been used to it as well with Labour government in Wales. But England is getting used to it. Interesting times incoming. Absolutely, yeah. That's a good note to conclude on. So let's leave it there for this week. Thanks for joining me for this hour. I'll see you next week. We've got a visitor coming on next week. We've got a special guest on next week. So do tune in at 9 o'clock next Tuesday. And it would be great to see you. Don't forget to watch Humza, Man, Myth and Muslim. You can catch up on our conference speeches as well on YouTube. And see you next week. Good night.